Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Heart Centered Therapist podcast. I'm so excited you're here today. Today, I want to introduce you to Dr. Mary Barbera. Dr. Mary Barbera fell into the autism world in 1999 when her firstborn son, Lucas, was diagnosed. Since then, Mary transformed from a confused and overwhelmed parent and a registered nurse to a board-certified behavior analyst, PhD, and best-selling author. Mary launched her first online course in early 2015 and later built additional courses and a membership program to help both parents and autism professionals. Mary's latest book, Turn Autism Around, that's also the name of her podcast. She has online courses, a weekly podcast, and social media posts, all of which have helped millions of parents and professionals worldwide start turning things around for young children with early signs of autism and older autistic children who are struggling with talking, tantrums, eating, sleeping, potty training, and much more. So we have a rock star in the house, my friends. I'm so incredibly fortunate to have Mary here with us, bringing a wealth of expertise, both personal and professional, and a heart dedicated to making a difference. So welcome, and let's get ready for an inspiring conversation about autism intervention. Hello, Mary.
Hi, Cindy. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I'm so excited. There's so much to share. You have amazing wealth of resources. You are an author, a highly esteemed trainer. You have so much to offer, but I always love starting by asking my guests about my mission, being heart-centered. And what does heart-centered mean to you?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I don't think I've ever gotten that question before. But I think just overall, in the year 2000, I heard a presenter by the name of Glenn Latham. He had his doctorate and PhD in special education. And I heard him speak at an autism conference, and he basically with 1 hour really changed my life and my focus. But his mantra was, we all need 8 positives to every negative. And he proved with research over the decades in the 70s and 80s starting that kids in special education received a lot more negatives than positives. It didn't have to be people yelling at them, but, I told you to stand in line, keep your hands to yourself, all those negative, threats and punishment. And he really felt strongly that everybody needs, some people say 5 positives to every negative, but his mantra was 8 positives to every negative. So I think with that in mind, I go about my day trying to be as positive as possible. And I think that is probably the whole crux of heart-centered therapy and heart-centered interactions with anybody, with or without disabilities or mental health issues. And the other thing that I've learned over the years as a behavior analyst is, if you see problem behaviors, whether you're talking about an adult working at Walmart or a child in special education, if you see problem behaviors, the demands are probably too high and or reinforcement is too low. And we really need to flip that and make it a lot more positive. And there's probably, prerequisite skills and things that are missing. So in my work as a trainer, the idea that the student is never wrong, if the student isn't learning or making progress, then your demands are too high, you're missing prerequisite skills, and your reinforcement is probably too low. So I hope that answers kind of where I'm at. Maybe it's a way different answer than you're used to, but with all my hats on, registered nurse, behavior analyst, mom to a son with autism, mom to a typical son, online course creator, author, I think that's, just be kind, be nice, realize that everybody's coming forth with their own backgrounds and their own baggage and their own learning histories and their own reinforcement and their own history of probably too many negatives, and try to flip that around.
Mhm. Oh, I mean, this is such a great and exciting answer because we don't often have somebody like you who wears so many different hats and can speak to different like niches within the listenership. And so it's actually really great. And I love that you you look at the way you can have compassion for somebody else based on, they might not be getting the reinforcements they need or they're positioned, without adequate support and bringing in the positives that inform our personal world and our professional world. It's so important. That really does come from the heart. I think that's amazing. And we're lucky to have you because we don't often get somebody who can talk from the behavior analyst position, which is so key for parents and therapists who are dealing with, like you said, somebody who has autism or is not typical, whether we're talking about pure autism or a speech and language delay or something else. And so it's really, really important to have you here and to like start from the beginning. You said you're an autism mom, and then you're also a mom of a typical kid and everything else. So what about like going back to when, you were a mom to Lucas? What
Yeah.
happened? What
Yeah.
was it like? Yeah.
So I had a master's degree in nursing administration from Penn, and I worked as a nurse manager. I married Charles. We're still married, and he was a emergency medicine resident
Oh,
at
wow.
the same hospital at Jefferson Hospital in Philadelphia. So I was pregnant when we moved back to my hometown of Reading, Pennsylvania, pregnant with Lucas. So I got done my job, moved. He started as an attending. And so we were really excited about the first baby, of course, and had Lucas. He seemed to be developing great, actually ahead of schedule. At 8 months old, people told me that they went to play dates with us and went home and were like, oh my God, like Lucas Barbera is just like really amazing. Like he
Mm.
would do sing-songy games, and he would say hi to people at 8 months of age, like language wise, and social. He was really social. So he started to regress when when I was pregnant with Spencer, and they're only 18 months apart.
Oh, wow.
But it was subtle. It wasn't like one morning he regressed. It was, I was pregnant and he was suddenly becoming a picky eater, not doing like, why isn't he saying hi to the camera anymore? And
Mhm.
and just subtle differences. But then, well, each child's different. They go through phases. You're weaning off baby food, you're weaning breastfeeding. It's like,
Nothing
okay,
to raise a big flag.
it's
You're
winter time. So after the baby was born, my husband started to get concerned. Of course, then the baby got RSV and Lucas got RSV right
Oh,
away. So we were like sick and watching
mm,
Barney, and I was just trying to like, um, and then, but my husband was concerned because Lucas's reaction to the baby was like completely clueless. Like we could have literally brought home a plastic baby doll, for as much
mhm.
as
Yeah,
he was aware. And I thought, well, he's only 18. I was just turning 18 months, and you know, babies vary.
exactly.
But he, in his work as an emergency medicine physician, saw other 15-month-olds, 18-month-olds, at least patting the mommy's belly and,
Mhm.
you know, playing
Right.
with the baby a little bit, aware. Um, so it was after Spencer's first well visit, he told me when I was taking the baby, can you ask him how many words Lucas should have? So I asked the doctor, and Lucas was 21 months of age at the time. And so I came home. So the doctor told me 20 words or 25 words or something like that. So I'm driving home, and
Mm.
it's a short drive. It's like 10 minutes. And I'm like E-I-E-I-O is 5 words. Like I was grasping at straws.
Oh,
He
gosh.
had this little phrase that he would say, please do not feed the ducks quack, quack. Like, but it was delayed echolalia, which was just a script, a sing-songy script that he would say. But like literally I was counting
Hoping for words.
any words or sounds or word approximations. And some of these words I didn't hear for like a month. And I was counting them. So I got home and the baby did fine at the well visit. And then Charlie said, well, what did he say about Lucas's words? And I said, oh, he said he has, he needed about 25 words. And then Charlie's like, but he doesn't have 25 words. And I was like, oh no, I counted, he does. And Charlie's like, so you don't think that he could have autism? And I like still remember my old house with the blue carpet. I was just like, what? And literally in that moment, I was just so shocked and like hadn't ever thought that there was anything wrong, let alone autism,
Of course. And
And,
you don't want to think that about your
and
kid. I can feel the
no,
angst just
I
as
was
you
just
tell
like,
this. Yeah.
I was just like, no, he doesn't have autism. Like, and like, shut up. I never want to hear the word. I never, ever want to hear the word autism again.
Yeah.
And like,
And you are both medical professionals, right?
right. And I had in the mid 80s some nursing school, I got my bachelor's in nursing and I went into a residential placement and there were teens that were thought to have autism. So like a baby versus these teens, like that's what was so concerning because these teens were very perseverative. I mean, they were in an institution,
Oh, right.
and so I was just like, I don't want to, I just thought if it was autism, and this is before the internet, this is before Facebook or anything. And the rate of autism back then was thought to be like 1 in 500. So you didn't really hear about it much. And so I really was just totally shut him down. And then, come the spring, Lucas looked better. I mean, he had signs, but then at the same time, like we enrolled him in typical preschool. So we were like, okay, maybe he just needs to get out of the house and and taught 2-year-old preschool. He went in, he wasn't like biting anybody, he wasn't doing anything weird. He didn't have any separation anxiety. But then by mid-year, the teacher and the director, and he had started speech therapy, which in the beginning, the reports were like, wow, we have, really good prognosis but it was both an expressive and a receptive delay. I mean, the real, thing is that now I'm thinking back, if I had the information, whoa, well, that was a little throw there. If I had the information in my newest book, Turn Autism Around, which is for toddlers, for me, back in the late 1990s when my husband first met,
Which did not exist.
if I had this information back then, I really, really believe that Lucas would be graduated from college driving. I mean, he would still have autism probably,
Right.
but I had no idea what to do.
Exactly. And
And
Mary, it
there's
took
a lot
so
of people that
long.
still don't know what to do. So I went into a state of denial. And it was the day before he was 3, he was diagnosed. And he was diagnosed, even though he had completed a whole year by himself in 2-year-old preschool, he was diagnosed with moderate to severe autism. And even my husband thought it was going to be mild autism. So then it was moderate to severe. And then I felt extra guilty. And I'm like, oh, but I read a book and you can make this better. And, kids can become, at the time there was a lot of talk about becoming indistinguishable and really, and he's like, yeah, like he didn't say like if you would have brought him in when he was 21 months,
Right.
but that's what he said basically. Like now it was a little too late for that, but I still was like, I felt very guilty about my denial. And I thought, well, some of these kids in the original studies to show the treatment outcomes were 3. Lucas just turned 3. I was going to just try my best to turn things around as much as possible. And we did. He made progress, but he's 27 years old now. He's still affected by moderate to severe autism. He has a mild intellectual disability. He needs 24/7 care. But then I became a professional, and I have worked with kids along the way who, have done really well. I mean, Lucas has done well.
Yeah.
For him, with his,
But you've also shortened the curve or the journey to treatment because of being able to help parents much earlier. Like, it was such a long, protracted journey for you to
yeah,
figure out, to get Lucas the diagnosis, to give the parents tools and strategies for you and your husband, right? And so now this is what you're helping other parents and families do, like, start to see what's happening for their kids when they're little, when they're babies and toddlers, and then give them ways that they can start to make a difference, bring in those positives, right? Just
yeah,
like we said at the beginning.
yeah. And break everything down. And, and
Educate.
unfortunately, now the rate is, it was 1 in 500. Now the rate is like 1 in 36. Worse for boys, like 1 in 24. Now the waiting list for an evaluation take 9 months to 2 years. And so
Wow.
there's not only, now there's less denial, less stigma, more information, but there's almost too much information out there. There's, reams and reams of information. Like, I have one of my online participants, Ruth, who joined my course last fall, but when she was going to join my course, she came to like a Q&A call or whatever I was doing. And she got on and she was all excited. She's like, I've listened to every single one of your podcasts, and I made some gains with sleep and potty, but my child's still not talking. And I'm like, you have to join the course. And I calculated, like, my episodes used to be like 45 minutes long. And I calculated that just in those 200 episodes, let alone other things that are out there that she's watched, or it was 165 hours of content that she took in and tried to make some gains. But it's complicated when you're trying to change all of these behaviors at the same time. You're trying to reduce problem behaviors. You're trying to increase talking. You're trying to increase picky eating. You're trying to improve, going to the doctor without screaming. You're trying to improve all these things. And it's like, podcast listening or reading my book, while it's great to take action, you really have to, get the information in a broken down way and get community support, so that when you get stuck, when they throw Mr. Potato Head across the room, you're not like, oh, shoot, I don't know what to do.
Right. The community support is so huge. And then chunking down the learning, that's important for all of us. And you know
Yep.
that because of your training, right? And so there's such a parallel process here. Yeah. So maybe thank you so much for sharing this vulnerable side of your journey and your family's journey, Mary. It's really gonna help normalize for what some people are going through, that they feel like they're the only ones, like, how could they talk about this? I feel so guilty, whatever. So thank you for that. Um, Applied behavior analysis. What is that? The science of it. I know it could take like volumes and volumes, but just to
Yeah.
kind of give us a working understanding.
Yeah. So your listeners are mostly therapists, right?
Yeah.
So they've heard of ABA, Applied Behavior Analysis, and they may hear that ABA is bad. There's a lot of controversy. There wasn't the controversy back in the late 1990s. That's what was and still is the most proven path to turn things around, whatever that means. But in the last couple of decades, especially with social media, and kids progressing lots more kids were diagnosed officially and progressing. Autism is a huge spectrum, right? So you have, with or without treatment, you have people on the high end of the spectrum that are working in jobs and creative jobs and engineering jobs and whatever jobs, maybe they were never diagnosed. Maybe they were diagnosed in middle school or high school. Maybe they are self-diagnosed or diagnosed as an adult, but you have a subset of people, and I'm not sure what percentage of the spectrum is in this camp, but they're able to advocate for themselves. They're able to go online and advocate for themselves. And over the years, just like anything, medicine was a lot different back 2, 3, 4 decades ago. What was kosher to do research on has changed, right? People used to spank their kids, and that was fine. That wasn't child abuse back then. So things have changed. So obviously the first ABA programs for kids with autism, they involved like some punishment and things like that don't look good and aren't good.
Right.
And that's why I think my ABA approach is different, because of my nursing and my mom background and my positive background, child-friendly background. And there's no reason to put punishment in place. But anyway, it's morphed in. But the subset of self-advocates, they don't like the sound of ABA. They don't like, so ABA programs for kids with autism are done in different ways. But then there's the ABA science, applied behavior analysis, which is the science of changing behavior, socially significant or important behavior. That's all it is a science. So when people say they don't like ABA or they hate ABA or ABA is abuse, well, they're talking about a program based on the science, because the science is always working. Your listeners would not be listening. You would not be talking to me if there was not some reinforcing value in it all. I wouldn't have shown up. I wouldn't have an online business. You wouldn't be talking to me. Your listeners wouldn't be listening if it wasn't information that was appealing to them, right? So the science is always working. And if you reinforce a behavior, it will maintain or go up. And sometimes it's not a person reinforcing a behavior. It's just a contingency that's happening, a fire alarm going off, or, some noise or some event, or
it's inherent in our environment and in our world as humans, how we interact with each other.
And it's important to also say, with humans, yes, and it's all based on animal research, pigeons and rats, and so are pharmaceuticals tested on animals first, and so are everything's tested, because we are animals. So people say, well, I don't want to treat my child like a dog, or I don't want to,
First off, you're not advocating that.
No, but the principles of reinforcement, punishment, shaping, extinction, like chaining, have all been proven and tested out with animals. And I'm sure half your audience has animals, has dogs and cats.
Exactly.
And we want a positive, pet-friendly approach to training them. I don't advocate for punishment for pets or electric collars and that sort of thing, because I don't own any pets. I don't know really much about animals at all, but I know a lot about training, and the training are very similar. We want to be positive, and that's all it is looking at. So we look at the science of ABA. The Turn Autism Around approach is 4 steps, 4 proven steps: assessment, planning, intervention or teaching, and using easy data to evaluate. The reason they're proven steps is it's the same 4 steps of the scientific method: assess, plan, intervene, evaluate, right? And it's a cycle.
Right. And so that brings the science right back into it. And so we have
So
this like historical prejudice about ABA as a program
right.
or as something done on animals or whatever. But what we're really looking at is the science. And if you think about, great modern day authors who are talking about habit stacking, that's a behaviorist approach, right?
Yep.
There's all kinds of things that we're doing now that we're encouraged to do that fall into the science.
And, video games and, dings or likes and, all that
Oh,
stuff,
yeah.
sports betting, like everything is marketing, cereal boxes with toys in them. Like this isn't, it is everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
In everything we do is the science of ABA. It's like physics. You reinforce a behavior, it's going to go up or maintain. So, but I agree with people who say this kind of therapy, and it doesn't have to be ABA, it could be speech therapy, it could be a psychologist, it could be, these people aren't trying to do bad things. It's just maybe they don't know a better way. And I wish that everybody would know about my course and my book and my podcast from the get-go, from the time the child is little. But, there are still a lot of ABA programs and a lot of speech therapists and a lot of psychologists who are recommending still threats and punishment and timeout and response cost and things that are not even a good Band-Aid.
Yeah, right.
Just
And so
not.
that's not the quality type of autism therapy that you're talking about. And if people could access your resources, even during the time that they're waiting for services to start, which could be 9 to 12 months, they
Or
get
2
the head
years.
start, or 2
Yeah.
years. And they
And
get
that's
to,
the critical time. As a nurse, I always worked in the neuro field, and with brain injuries and strokes and heart attacks, you think about the golden hour and the first year after, an injury, a head injury or a stroke. We've got to turn things around as quickly as possible. As soon as there's a delay, and we have 50% of our online participants in the toddler course do not have an autism diagnosis. So they are being proactive and smart about getting in, finding out what's working in terms of increased talking, decreased tantrums, improve eating, sleeping, potty training. These are all just general parenting techniques that work amazingly well if there's no delays and no
They still
other.
work well for all
They
kids.
will work well for everybody, and they're a lot harder to put in place, especially for older kids who've had other therapies that are they're more resistant because they just just like everybody you see, the older you get, the more probably trauma that you've experienced, trauma in
Absolutely.
treatment, trauma in your family life. And then that's hard to undo in addition to all your developmental delays and
Yeah, and or expecting that, the person you interact with is going to respond negatively or reject you, or, it goes back to the importance of those positives and what supports are needed. I'm so glad you brought up also how the toddler course can help regular kiddos, like just basic parenting. And we'll list everything, but it's basically marybarbera.com, and you can find everything there. But Mary has like a really amazing YouTube station. And so I was listening to a couple of her podcasts, and one of her YouTube videos is called, "Is it Speech Delay or Autism? Early Autism Signs in Toddlers." It has 1.5 million views. At least that was as of this morning. It's amazing. And you also say, like, it doesn't really matter if it's speech delay or autism. Tell us about that.
It really doesn't. We've had many members take our course with just a speech delay, And I thought Lucas had just a speech delay when we began. And I didn't know how to, he had some words, I call them pop out words, but I didn't know how to get him talking more. I didn't know the differences between, people say language, but there's expressive language and then there's receptive language. So receptive language is following directions. And then the expressive language is also, there's 4 elementary verbal operands. So if somebody says my child has 10 words, I want to know, do they label things, which is a tact? Can they request things, which is really what we want? It's a mand. And can they echo? I say ball, you say ball. That's an echoic. And or can they answer questions or fill in the blank? That's an interverbal. So these 4 elementary verbal operands are also at play. And so when you're talking about a speech delay, it's expressive and or receptive, right? So that those basic things, and then we don't want a kid who's just like obsessively looking through books and saying ball, train, truck, car, and not requesting juice, not requesting open to go outside.
So they're missing like an understanding.
They're missing they have the motivation to get things, but they don't know how to ask for things. And if you don't know how to ask for things, think of it, Cindy, where you're going to a foreign country and no words.
Right.
And you're leaving,
terrifying. I always try to learn a few words before I go.
Right. So what words are you going to learn?
Functional words. Thank you, hello, please, certain foods, toilet, all those things.
Right. So
how, where.
Right. So really what you need, or you need your
help,
the things that you're going to need. Those are the words you're going to. So I would agree with different foods that you would need, or even just eat, and we have the good fortune to also have apps where we can translate and have that ability. But we would need toilet, like you said, we would need water, different foods, taxi maybe. So, but if you could do please, that wouldn't really help you. Right.
That's true.
So if you just go up and you say please, or you say more, which is most common sign and word that
we're doing sign here,
teach, which is I don't agree with. We need, to get functional words that the child can ask for with the item in sight. So now the item is in sight and you can request it. So a lot of my early learner programs is the shoebox program, for instance. You get a shoebox, you cut a slit into it. For kids that have autism or not, who have little to no speech, right? Then you get a shoebox with a slit into it. You have pictures of mommy, daddy, Spot the dog, goldfish crackers, juice, whatever. You hold it up, you say, mommy, and you bring it a little closer, mommy. And the child might say, mama. You give the child the picture as soon as they say it, or if they don't say it after 3 times, you give it to them anyway. All they have to do is put the picture in the shoebox. So it's cause and effect. It gets active engagement. You're not throwing a bunch of words at them. Now, if you were in a foreign country and I said, ooby, 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 and that was water, you'd be like, I'm going to remember that. Ooby.
Right. That is amazing. Brilliant.
So what these early learner programs do, we do the same thing with puzzles, with potato head, shoebox, is it combines, it's part manned because the child wants to take the picture and put it in eventually. It's part tact because they can see it. It's part echoic because I'm saying the word.
There's repeating it.
And it's part just sitting, attending, joint attention. And so I don't get very technical in like, discriminative stimulus and extinction. And,
Oh,
parents don't
right.
need that.
Yeah.
Just use the 1 word times 3 strategy, use these easy things to get language going, to take a baseline assessment so you really know where you're starting. And then in many cases, language just explodes. So there really doesn't matter. I mean, speech delay versus autism, chapter 2 of Turn Autism Around is all about the early signs. I pretty much for an 18-month or 2-year-old will look for pointing. Pointing with your index finger is really important by 18 months and 2 years of age. Pointing to show you things and to request is important.
And is that considered like expressive communication? Or
Well,
it's
it's
not
a
really expressive
nonverbal,
speech,
it's a
nonverbal
gesture. It's a
gesture.
gesture,
Okay.
a nonverbal gesture, but it is important that pointing develops
Yeah.
by 18 months or 2. And then the other thing I look for, so kids with autism who are going to get a diagnosis tend to not point and instead tend to, there's bubbles here that they want. So they tend to take your hand and hand lead to the bubbles. And so lack of pointing with hand leading is
Mhm.
particularly leading
Interesting.
me to think that it's more autism. But
Yeah.
in my online course, I have a bonus on how to teach pointing. So you can teach any of this. So there's
Mhm.
no reason to sit and wait and worry,
Yeah.
whether it's speech delay or autism. And that's the point of the 10-minute video that's gotten, 10 times more views than anything else I've ever created. But it's on YouTube. And you can always search Mary Barbera plus the topic, and it'll lead you like biting. I have a great video on that. Is it speech delay or autism? Tantrums, anything. You have a family in denial. I have videos on that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's and I just love that example of the shoebox exercise because I know there are some parents and clinicians who will be able to just go right to that and try it and see, or use it like with whoever. It's so important. And it just shows the easy accessibility. That's one of the beautiful things about not just your book, but your programs. And it's trying to help parents not overthink this, but just do what's going to be best for their kids and then for their families, because this has got to put so much stress too. That lack of knowing, like you described with your own personal journey, put so much stress on the family and then on the marriage, on the siblings, right? Like I'm sure you've seen a lot of that. And it sounds like, Mary, you also have created some community to support parents and families going through this.
Yeah, I think that's, a really important part of the course. You get the course and the community because, I have traveled all over the world speaking about autism. I've gone to Australia 3 times and France and the UK and Germany and all over the United States as well. But what would happen is, they would pay me a lot of money to go out there and pay my expenses. And people would fly in from different countries and they would pay a lot of money and stay in hotels. And I would speak. The last time I went to Australia, I only spoke for like an hour keynote for all that expense and time. And then parents would, see my videos and then they would go home and try this. Even the shoebox, I mean, it's not like a slam dunk, even though it sounds very simple. What happens if the kid then becomes obsessive about it?
Mhm.
What happens if the kid throws the cards or starts chewing the cards? Like there was no way for people to go like, I'm confused because like
Mm,
Johnny wasn't throwing potato head in Mary's videos when I saw her present them.
mm,
But they can literally step by step, and we've built it in where
mm,
we tell you, do not start table time. Do not start the shoebox program until you get through module 3, because there's
mhm.
a lot of pitfalls that we want to make sure that you're pairing things up and you're going systematically and you're
The
making
system,
sure,
yeah,
yeah,
and the
making sure.
environment, you said that's so important. The type of learning environment that you set up and that is aligned for the child.
Yeah. And then it's based on their particular strengths and needs. Because you might have a 14-month-old or an 18-month-old who's not talking at all, which isn't that alarming, right? That, is a great sleeper, but is a extremely picky eater, or you might have a 4-year-old who is, talking in little phrases, or has been taught colors and now is obsessive over colors, but can't tolerate getting their hair cut. So we teach you how to assess your child or client, and then make a plan based on their unique strengths and needs. So you don't have to all be at the same level. You can go on your own. And we've had participants in my online courses, which I'm very proud of, over the past 8.5 years, from over 100 countries.
Oh, wow.
So it is very much, multilingual in there. Everybody is, there are many, many parents in there and professionals who they themselves speak 3 languages. There's a lot of conversation about teaching 2 languages, 3 languages, how to get school, on the same page, etc.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's such a beautiful thing to be proud of, and to create this type of resource and community where other people don't feel so alone when they're going through this, or so singled out, because it can be negative to also, get feedback from your preschool or from your daycare, right? Like, even that isn't always positive, because the preschools are overworked and understaffed, and the parents
And
don't always know what to do.
it might not be a good fit for the preschool. Like, I do have a video, if you could search Mary Barbera kicked out of preschool.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
I have a video on just about everything. So, and it doesn't have to be autism. It could be,
Yeah,
I
you have
don't,
a video on marriage and
yes,
some.
I have podcasts on marriage, what marriage couples therapists need to know about autism. I did a talk on that, and that's a podcast. Um, yeah, I have lots of things on grandparenting, on siblings, on problem behaviors, you name it. It's probably
Yeah,
there.
yeah, right. Um, I think it's really cool that you also provide this training for clinicians, whether it's, certified ABA clinicians, because they don't always get the same practical information in their training programs. And I certainly see it from the therapist perspective of what interns get in terms of counseling skills and actual practical application of that. And so I imagine you're giving the clinicians much more hands-on understanding and experience.
Yeah, I am. And, we train parents and professionals together. And I think the key role of the therapist, no matter if they're a ABA therapist or psychologist or a marriage counselor, is to support the family, but also to learn these techniques, because you might be out there giving, not, I don't want to say the wrong advice, but advice like, take away the electronics, or, he's got to learn. And it's like, that threats of punishment and punishment will almost always backfire. And there are proactive ways to, especially for kids that are not conversational, that don't have the skills. I'm not an expert on kids with super high functioning autism. I mean, I've worked with many, but I
Yeah.
don't have a course for them, because it is so, with your clients with mental health issues, a lot of high functioning autistic people who are fully conversational, they do have a higher incidence of other mental health disorders, such as obsessive compulsive and
Mhm.
ADHD and
ADHD,
bipolar and
social
anxiety and
anxiety. Yeah.
depression, and maybe the children who can't communicate also have those issues, but they can't, converse and tell us exactly, but it doesn't matter. Like, I am so not about, well, that's because they have a diagnosis of, ODD or OCD. No, that it's behavior, and good behaviors can be increased and problem behaviors can be decreased. And
Mhm.
regardless of the diagnosis, the medication they're on, or even the family background. I mean,
Mhm.
there are certainly harder situations in many cases where, you have the family that has no time and no resources and no breaks and no ability to pay babysitters, or, no cars, no computers. Like, I'm not
So many
saying everybody
barriers.
can turn this around at the same rate, but if
Yeah.
you have a highly motivated parent with enough resources to be able to dive in, and enough motivation to really, and enough hope that they truly can make a difference, I don't think it's ever too early or too late to try.
Oh, yeah. And you provide so much hope. I think that's key, Mary. You really provide so much hope, and when somebody lands on your website, they feel that hope, and they see the possibilities of change. And early intervention is so important, and it's not too late. I love how you say that. But we've found more and more, like, the sooner the better. And so you're really focused on helping parents of especially young kids
Mhm.
to try to help them way sooner and have a much more, like, fulfillment in their lives, so much more satisfaction as kids and parents together.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I wanted for you to just say something about this because I thought it was really important for our listeners, whether they're parents or clinicians. I was listening to one of your podcasts and you were talking about how important it is for somebody, like, maybe it's the mom, or usually it's the mom, or for somebody to, like, kind of put their hand up and say, okay, I'm it. I'm the one who's going to be like captain or quarterback or whatever you call it,
Mhm.
because there's such a team involved. And this just seems to me so important in terms of, like, creating a good care model. If you could just
Mhm.
tell us a little bit about, like, what is this notion of captain?
Yep, captain of the ship, I call them.
Oh,
And
okay.
usually one parent, usually the mom, but I have had grandmothers and dads. We just ran a very low end 5 days to more talking challenge where we got a great grandfather who
Wow.
took the course, and he became the captain of the ship and developed an amazing assessment and plan and a whole training protocol for his whole family, which I was
Wow.
like, oh my goodness, I don't even know that I've ever seen a grandfather, let alone a great grandfather, to
Oh,
be.
great grandpa. That's awesome.
So it's really just one person to say, I'm going to coordinate this. And it was me, but I also had a great background for it because I had a master's degree in nursing administration. I was a nurse manager. I was involved with hiring, firing, training. So it came easier to me. I've always, as a kid, been a great delegator. Like, I have a PhD in leadership now. My dissertation was all on training people. So I think we need to, as clinicians, and that's most of your audience, we need to empower parents, especially a parent that you're training, to take the lead, because I think a lot of parents are made to feel like, I need to leave it to the professionals. I need to take my seat in the back of the bus and at the end of the table and not be involved. But the parent is the one with the most motivation. They
Mhm.
have the most vested interest in making sure this turns out as well as it can. And we don't have a crystal ball to look forward or backward, but I really do believe that kids do best when at least one parent is super involved and coordinates and doesn't let their child go to situations like, I mean, I've had stories where, Susie Q is driving 70 minutes away to a speech therapy appointment because she finally got off the waiting list and insurance is going to pay. So she's got to drive them there. And then she gets there, she's in my course, right? So she's already learning all this stuff, and she's learning to be positive, and she's learning to not let kids cry it out. And
Mm.
she gets there and they're like, oh, our policy is you need to wait in the waiting room for a
Wow.
2-year-old. We're going to take your child from you. The child can't talk. You wouldn't leave them alone with a doctor or a
Oh,
therapist or
right.
anybody, an audiologist. I mean, where would you leave a 2-year-old by themselves without an advocate? The child's crying.
Oh, it's just heartbreaking.
And
Yeah.
then, parents are like, parents need to know that they need to speak up.
Yeah.
And they need to be like, no, I'm coming along. My child's 2 or 3 or 4 or 8 and they can't talk. Or,
Yeah.
not just to prevent abuse, but to see what they're doing. Are they on the same page? Are they going to do carrier phrases, which I don't recommend? Are they going to use multiple controls? So you get, even with my son's experience with speech therapy, great speech therapist. I was able to go in the room. I didn't know what I was doing. So it all looked great, except for in hindsight,
Mm.
we went in and, she did bubbles and stuff, which was, really great, manding,
Mhm.
echoing, he wanted it, he liked it, he was happy. And then, okay, all done bubbles. And then she would pull out things like some versus one versus all, which I don't even think at 27 years of age, he would know how to do
Right.
those tasks.
Yeah.
She'd pull out, is this an apple? She was working on yes, no tax,
Mm.
which is a technical term. He didn't learn till he was like 8, till I
Yeah.
figured out how to teach him. Luckily for us, Lucas had a laid back personality, and he didn't
Mm.
really care that the bubbles were getting put away. But a lot of kids do. And
Right.
so we need to make sure that all speech therapy for 2-year-old kids who are not yet talking revolves around keeping them happy, keeping them engaged, having that multiple control, and it's a waste of time and money to drive them anywhere where you're not going to get a positive result. And
Exactly.
people aren't going to be willing to listen to you as the captain to say what works for your
Right.
child.
Because you still know your child best.
Yep.
And
And you
you
still
need to
have
be.
his best interest at heart always. And I remember one of my early days working in schools with the Verbal Behavior Project of Pennsylvania, and this 100-pound 8-year-old was laying on the floor screaming. And I was just like, I was a new BCBA, there was a new consultation, and after that whole, I was kind of told to stand in the back, that I was just there for language, not for problem behavior. And I'm like, okay, we got some problems,
Yeah.
so I said to the teacher after everything was calmed down, I said, I'm really concerned about that event. He's 8 years old, he's 100
Mhm.
pounds. And I think Lucas was probably 12 or 14 at the time. And I said, but he's going to be, 16 and 200 pounds. And like, you're, you're not going to be able to, you know, then we're really going to have trouble. And she looked at me, she said, well, he's not going to be my student then.
Oh
And
my
I'm like,
goodness.
oh my goodness, wrong answer, right? So the parent is going to be the parent, and we need to have positive things going on at every step.
Yeah. Right. It's a
And
great
that's
example.
why I really think that the parent, whenever possible, should be the captain of the ship.
Yeah.
And if the parent doesn't have the ability to, for whatever reason, a grandparent, a caregiver, a nanny, or maybe a teacher or a therapist could fill that role.
Mhm.
Just really not sure how that person would be paid to fill that role.
Right, right. And ideally though, we want to empower the parent, right? I'm thinking about, a BCBA who goes into the home, or maybe it's a therapist who does HCT or home visits, right? To help empower the parent, that empower the parents, that this is your responsibility. This is what's going to create attunement with you and your child, that they know you're going to have their back. I mean, I remember a client who took her son, who was probably like maybe 12, to physical therapy, and they were still told to wait in the car. And that wasn't okay for the son and the mom, right? And I can't even remember the outcome, but it was not good, right? It was very distressing for mom and dad, very distressing for the kid, right? And so these are really important things that we don't want to overlook. And creating that learning environment, or the positive healing environment, therapeutic environment, is key. And that's what you're really also coaching parents on to look for, and to create, to seek out.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think is most helpful for parents and professionals in terms of like burnout and self-care? Like, that's kind of my last question. I know we could do a whole other podcast on it, but
Yeah.
just from your
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah, I think that's one thing I've been fortunate about is I am married to a physician.
Mhm.
I moved back to my hometown. I still have my parents who are
Oh,
in their mid
nice.
80s. They have been extremely helpful. So I have my parents were so helpful early on. My sister and brothers still live in the hometown. I have 41st cousins. We
Wonderful.
we had a babysitting co-op. We had, the pool circle, um and I have a typical son who is 18 months younger, and he's in med school. So I always had his, Boy Scout mom, first
Yeah.
Thursday group. And so, in fact, we were just out last night for the first Thursday group, and our boys are, grown adults,
Right.
and Spencer's in fourth year med school. So he's going to
Wow.
be a physician soon
And
too.
I can't wait to listen to that episode where Spencer talks about being a sibling. So
Yeah, that's a
that's next
great
on my
one.
feed. I
That's
can't
a
wait for
great one.
that.
It's marybarbera.com/85, or you can search Mary Barbera or Mary Autism
Right.
plus Siblings, and you can find it. But that's a great episode. It's a very much a fan favorite. So I feel like I've had a ton of support. We also had au pairs live with us
Hmm.
for 8 years when my boys were little, so that I could write my first book and travel the world and earn a PhD and
Mhm.
work as a behavior analyst. So otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to do that. Like most, I ask this podcast question every interview. I say, part of my podcast goals are not to just help the kids, but help the parents and professionals. So what are your self-care tips?
Okay.
And wide variety of answers, but I do get a lot of sleep.
Mhm.
um I do enjoy taking walks. I do enjoy hanging out with friends. I don't enjoy exercise, but I know it's so important, so I am trying to join
Yeah.
different activities to keep myself active. And I also have the financial resources to higher care. But I've also, people are like, oh, well, that's really expensive. And, to have a child with autism. Actually, Lucas is, because of my advocacy early on, I always had a lot of ABA therapy that was covered. I have a waiver for him now, an adult waiver it basically covers all of his care. So you don't have to be wealthy to get care.
Yeah.
You might have to invest a lot of time. I went to 2 due process cases all the way up to federal court. I
Wow.
filed fair hearings and mediation. And, over the years, I fought like I didn't have money to pay for things. Because, I mean, if you just pay outright, you
Mhm.
will go broke.
Right.
It is
Well,
very expensive. And part of why I was fighting is I was fighting for the English as a second language mom in the city who didn't have a car or a computer. It's like, if this
absolutely.
is the nonsense they're pulling with me, I'm going to advocate not just for Lucas, but to raise the bar for all kids. So
Right.
in terms of self-care, I even though autism, or like circling back to, I never ever want to hear the word autism again. Now I hear it, type it, speak it, say it many, many times a day. It doesn't stress me out.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm on a huge mission to change the way autism is detected and treated, and to change the way delays are treated by empowering families to really take control and not leave it to the professionals and not think that there's no hope to turn things around, because there always is.
Mm. Thank you for doing this work, Mary. And your
Yeah.
mission. I mean, it's so needed, necessary, and your heart just bursts through as you talk about it. And I think in some ways even your self-care is pursuing what's meaningful to you professionally and your identity and your goals. And sometimes we miss that in self-care because we think it's got to be like, softer and smushy, but it can be like driven that way because
Yeah.
that helps us stay aligned with ourselves and our identity. And so then we don't burn out. But yes, the fact that you could do all of that and go through that for Lucas and then advocate for these other parents and teach them how to do it. And um, people can't see us on the video, but your book is so beautiful. Turn Autism Around. Everybody should go get that on Amazon or their local bookstore. It's really great. And I really acknowledge you for coming here because you have so many other responsibilities, but to bring some awareness about autism intervention and ABA science to our listeners is huge. And I really hope people will look at your course, whether they're parents or clinicians. It's great. MaryBarbera.com. Tell everybody else where they can find you, like all of the other things. Is it Mary Barbera on every platform?
Yeah, marybarbera.com, or on, if you want to get to my Facebook, marybarbera.com/Facebook/Instagram/YouTube/
Perfect.
I'm pretty much everywhere, either with Mary Barbera or Turn Autism Around.
Yes. And also, when you go to her website, this is super important too. She has a free autism 10-minute assessment for a child or client with autism. So, I mean, there's so many resources. Your generosity of heart and spirit is overflowing. So, again, thank you for doing this work and helping children and families in our world.
Yeah, well, thank you for helping me get the message out to mental health professionals, therapists, and all of your listeners. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Great. You're welcome. Thank you.